welcome to West Country Wanderings, and welcome to a different sort of video today. Today I'm in Gloucestershire, but a very little known corner of it near the Welsh border. In fact, we're close to the Welsh town of Chepstow here today. We'll be coming across Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust land today, and we're in a loop at the River Wye, and we're going down to have a look at the remains of a church and a village called Landcourt. St James the Church at Landcourt here in Gloucestershire. So I hope you can join me here on West Country Wanderings for another wander around some woods, some peace and quiet, and a river, and seeing what we can see in this beautiful place by the banks of the River Wye. Now, there are two nature reserves here, both looked after in the care of the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust. The first one is one called Bangor Gore, and you'll see and hear lots of Welsh connections to this much contested strip of land right on the Welsh borders here. And the other one is Landcourt. In fact, I'm currently in Landcourt Wood, making a steep descent towards the church and the former village too. When I get there, I'll tell you more about the history of this church and the lands hereabouts, and why the village became abandoned too. The whole place is steeped in mystery, but it's also surrounded by beautiful wildlife and birdsong, as you can hear. Now, the River Wye is off to my left, to your right of the screen. It's covered in the trees at the moment, so it's very difficult to make out the river, but hopefully the views will open out as we get lower down by the church and the land flattens out too. I'm expecting it to be rather boggy because we've had days and days and days of rain, and this is the first day where it hasn't rained, so hoping it will hold off today for our walk here on West Country Wanderings. But yeah, it's just beautiful being out in woodland and to be able to stretch my legs again in readiness for getting back on the Severn Way, of course. Now, if you've been following West Country Wanderings for some time, when I was back living in South Devon, you may remember a couple of my Brixham videos where they featured a couple of these things. In fact, the whole town of Brixham is surrounded by lime kilns, and that's what we've got here. This is also a heavily mined and quarried area. Now, the reason I decided to come here today was about 3 months ago I did one of my monthly vlogs from the village of Tidnam, just about 3 miles from here, when we had a look at Tidnam Tunnel. And I'll be coming back to Tidnam Tunnel because it's still not open after the spring. It should, as we go into early summer, it should be open, and we'll be having a walk through there to Tintern and crossing into Wales that way. So that'll be a separate video. So when I was planning that monthly vlog, I saw this. I come across this lost village, as it were, marked on the OS map, and the abandoned church, and I'd never heard of it before, despite living in Gloucestershire for many, many years, and I don't think many people have. It's one of those little known, tucked away places that you really need to come and seek out. Now just down there is an enormous shaft, but it's not a mine shaft or indeed a coal mine. It's actually linked to the mine kilns that we saw earlier. And you have this shaft which is effect of flue, for letting up the fumes that would have come up as they were heating up the lime to produce lime for fertilisers, etc. But it is really quite deep. I'm really surprised there's no fence or no capping here. I've just literally walked off the main footpath to have a look at the quarry. Again, no fence or sign. And you just kind of stumble across this through the undergrowth. So it is a little bit treacherous. But yeah, it drops right down to the lime kiln below. Well, this quarry is just an idyllic spot. It's just above the main footpath that heads down to the ruin of St James Church. Now at this point here, the path making its descent to the village and the church splits. But the split doesn't seem to be marked on my OS map, but there is a little red marker arrow there and another one, an older one, a yellow marker arrow on that tree there. So we're going to turn left, make our way steadily down the gradient. If it gets too boggy, I'll return and then use the footpath that's on the right. Anyway, we'll see how we go. Now it's fabulous to see these wood anemones here in the wood. Just coming out. They've survived all the wet weather. I can also just hear a woodpecker in the distance too. If I'm not mistaken, we have a very early bluebell there. Now this is one of the best woodlands I've ever heard for birdsong here. The amount of life here is absolutely extraordinary. I'm not an expert on recognising all the sounds, but I'll shut up and just add in the soundtrack now, the sounds I've recorded here today. See if you can identify them. Love to hear from you and drop a comment below if you do. Now inside the wood I've just come across this curiosity here. Got some stones around the outside of it. And we have this metal fence which has just been loosely placed over the top. Now it could be a well, or it's possibly a mine shaft for mining. There was ironstone mining in this area, as well as coal mine of course, because we're here right just on the edge, well we're in the Forest of Dean administered area, but we're in the edge of the Forest of Dean proper at the moment. Let me know what you think this is. So we're just coming up to Landcourt farm now. It was just below this site where the village originally stood, and we also have that church I was talking about earlier just below that. And the River Wye is in a loop. You can see the trees there in the background. It winds its way round deep, and I'll insert a map now so you can see what it looks like from an aerial shot if you like. There's the famous rocks above the River Wye, arriving majestically there. That's the footpath where it's indicating left. That's the one I've just come down from. And we need to go through this gate here to make our way down the field. As you can see, signposted across there. But yeah, that's just a fabulous view of the river's cliffs. Now, when I was doing the research for this little walk today, it said there was virtually no remains of the village that was originally here, apart from obviously the farm and a cottage and a barn house, which is now used for a holiday let, I believe. I think it's just called the barn house. But this here most definitely remains here of a building. You can see the exposed rock there, and just over there you can make out a dip in the land just in front of that barn. There's even some large boulders there too. And even as I make my way down through this field down towards the river and the church, you can see some stones or rocks there just at the base of that telephone pole there, and some further down there by that enormous looking tree. Very old looking tree too. Wow, that truly is spectacular there. See that house there just on the left of your screens there, just perched on the top of that cliff, and another one just to the left of that as well. Wow, that's some height. I'm not sure the height of that cliff. I'll look at the OS map. I'll insert that as a subtitle now. You can see some more remains just over there, just by that dry stone wall. And that, I think, down there is the remains of our church, I believe. I'm not 100% certain because it's not very clearly marked on the maps, the location. It just says remains vaguely. It doesn't pinpoint to it. Well, anyway, we're going to have a closer look at that. So I've just checked my map again. No, that isn't the church. There's no footpath down there. In fact, you can't get into that field. It is private there. So I think that's just an agricultural building, although it is very picturesque with the ivy and the shrubbery growing up the sides of it. But we need to head along this way in that general direction through the gap in the hedge, and it should be on there just by the edge of the wood. A grassy bank here is a delight, full of both celandines and, a bit further away, some more primroses. Lovely. And yet more evidence there of previous occupation here at Lancaut on the peninsula of the River Wye in Gloucestershire. Wonderful. I think we go through this gate, and there should be a clearing just beyond it where our church is. Anyway, let's go and have a look. Wow, that's a magnificent sight, just peeping out of the woods there through the gate. Just literally a minute's walk through that gate, and you come to this right by the banks of the river. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some photographs around the church, set my tripod up, and then tell you a little bit more about the history of this church and the village that was once here. Now this incredible survivor is St James the Great Church here at Landcourt, sometimes known as Landcourt, believed to come from a Welsh saint. Now there was believed to have been a church or a chapel built here in the late 8th century, but there's some evidence to suggest it was destroyed by the Vikings around the late 900s. This church that survives here today was built around 1170. Now a few years ago, I think it was in the 1980s, the roof collapsed and there was a problem that the whole thing could completely fall to the ground. Thankfully it was bought by a local trust, and in 2014 the site was purchased from the Queen's estate for the sum of £1, and it's now looked after by the Forest of Dean Buildings Trust. Such a beautiful location here by the banks of the River Wye. Those services carried on right into the 19th century, even occasionally, and you can see a photograph on the information board as you enter the church, right up until the late 1930s, just before the start of the Second World War. But yeah, it's a stunning location here. And as you can see down there, there's an outline of another building here. So what's the village all about? Well, I suspect, again, like we've seen many times on this channel, that the residents of the village probably died in the Black Death in the 1300s. And they didn't decide on this occasion to rebuild the village. But as I say, the church carried on fulfilling its need long after the original village that surrounded it had disappeared, as you can see here. But it's a wonderful place and well worth exploring and having a look for yourselves. Now the rocks behind me are known as Wintour's Leap because in early 1645 one John Wintour, sometimes known as Wintour, moved his royalist forces during the English Civil War from Lydney, which is a town in the Forest of Dean about 8 miles to the north of here, down to this location on the River Wye to see if he could make an approach across the river into Wales. Unfortunately, he was blocked by the opposing forces. And legend has it that he threw himself to safety over those rocks there. Certainly wouldn't fancy that every time since then. It's been known as Wintour's Leap. Today, it's a famous mountaineering spot. There are some mountaineers over there today. I've been hearing their voices echoing around the rocks. Certainly, it's not something I would particularly fancy, but if you do fancy mountaineering, that's a location to test out your mountaineering skills there. Well, that's it for today here on West Country Wanderings. Hope you enjoyed this tour in the far southwestern corner of Gloucestershire, near the border with the country of Wales, in the loop of the River Wye. Delightful spot here at Lancourt or Landcourt, whichever you prefer. Been wonderful here listening to the bird song. Also seeing that, was it a well, was it a mine shaft? I don't know. Love to know your thoughts on that. Until next time on the channel, take care of yourselves, look after yourselves, and I hope to see you on the channel again very, very soon. All the best for now. Cheers. Goodbye.